So welcome everybody. Thanks to another TPAS webinar. You'll be glad to know I'm not going to be doing the talking on this one. We've got an associate we've been working with, Catherine, we'll introduce in a second. And she's done all the legwork, all the hard work, talking to people in Scotland, and will be the main presenter today. I need to start with some slides. It's just the way we are, so bear with me, and I will get them up. Yep. 2 seconds. Just need to adjust them. Switch them around. Now I'm hoping you now all see it in full screen mode. Hello. For some reason, I think I might have just added myself into the corner, which was not my intention. I'm not going to start that all over again, but sorry if you've got me twice. Welcome to this. Does Wales need a housing charter like Scotland? Truthfully, this came from I obviously as TPAS, we engage with TPAS Scotland, England, Northern Ireland, and I see other things, and we've got about 4 things we want to run as over the next sort of 6 months of things we've seen in other nations, and pose that question of, do we need them in Wales, or are they just unique to those nations? I know we've got some Northern Ireland colleagues on this today. There's a lot of unique stuff in their area, and appropriate for them. So this was the first of a series we'll be doing. I'll be polling you at the end to see what interest you have in the next subjects. But yeah, does Wales need a housing charter like Scotland? And why are we here? I've mentioned already, we want to learn from each other. We want to share best practice. I want to challenge the existing thinking as well as to why do they have something? Why do we not do? Is it the same? Is it different? And should we have something similar? I just want to do a quick reminder because it's important as when Catherine hands over. There's a quick reminder that housing associations are regulated by a regulation team in Welsh Government. So central Welsh Government regulation. It's done annually, and there's a whole different formula for how often they produce reports and short reports. But essentially, Welsh Government regulation team, housing association. Local authorities are a bit different. They're not regulated, they're audited by Audit Wales, and that's done infrequently, and we'll talk about that a bit different. And they don't necessarily always audit the housing department, they're auditors of local authority. And I think that's going to be important for this subject later. So enough of that. And also the point of this really was to establish with you, especially the tenants here, is do you think this is a good or bad idea, or do you just don't care? So bear with me on this. Let's go through the material, see what you think, and I'd love to know your thoughts at the end as to whether what you think of this Scottish Housing Charter. So no further ado, I'm going to hand over to the person who's done all the work. I'm just the co-host here today, Catherine Evans, Research and Policy Associate with TPAS Company. Over to you, Catherine.
Thank you very much. Yes, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us. Just to explain a bit about my background, I previously worked as a solicitor and now looking to move more into the policy space, so a slight kind of career pivot. But my background as a solicitor hopefully means that I've got a lot of experience of reviewing this kind of documentation, this kind of regulation. So hopefully that helps me with looking at all of this stuff. I should have access to moving the slides along. Let's have a little look. There we go. So I spoke to various different people in Scotland as part of this. Here's just a list of some of the people who I spoke to, but basically we spoke to people in Scottish Government, tenants association of various different types, and also informally we spoke to people at the TPAS Scotland conference, and also spoke to Tony, who is an Association of Local Authority Chief Housing Officers Policy Manager. So a big range of views there. So what we're going to be doing, also just to talk about who I speak to in Wales, this is more specifically related to the audit of local authority. I spoke to various people in local authority housing across Wales, and obviously also spoke to David Lloyd and David Wilson at TPAS Cymru to get their views. So what is the Scottish Social Housing Charter? So firstly, it sets out standards and outcomes that all social landlords should be achieving for their tenants, and in the documents it says and other customers, but meaning tenants when performing their housing activities. So the key point to bear in mind, as David touched on before, is that it applies to RSLs / housing associations and local authority housing. So all of the things we're going to touch on today apply to both together. Just move on to the slide. There we go. So the Charter's purpose is to give tenants a clear understanding of what they should expect from a social landlord, give landlords a clear understanding of what they should be delivering, and also to give landlords, to provide the basis for the Scottish Housing Regulator to monitor and assess and report on social landlords' performance of the Charter. So it's a living working document. It was first introduced in April 2012, and it's been revised every 5 years or so. So the last revision was 2022. So just worth mentioning, I think that as it's been in place since 2012, it's had plenty of time to bed in and provide us with a decent point of comparison, so a useful case study for us to look at. So looking first of all at the drafting of the Charter and how the Charter came about before we get into the detail of what it says. So first of all, it was developed in successive and extensive consultation with stakeholders. It began with a blank sheet of paper, and the various people who I spoke to in Scotland, a lot of them were keen to emphasise that fact, that basically it began with a blank sheet of paper, and there was an extensive consultation process about what people actually wanted it to include. And it was quite a long consultation period as well, from what I've seen. So a lot of initial consultations, seeing what people thought of that, going back with amendments. It seems to be quite extensive. And TPAS Scotland undertook consultations on behalf of the Scottish Government as part of the initial consultation. That was with young people, tenants in supported housing, tenants in rural and remote communities, homeless people, and helped to run various road shows to engage with tenants. So worth mentioning that tenants across Scotland were engaged on this. Obviously, there's going to be quite a lot of different housing stock in Scotland, similar to Wales in terms of inner city stuff and rural stuff, and all tenants seem to be consulted on that.
Sorry, can I?
Yeah.
I hate to interrupt you. I've had some comments that I'm somehow in the way
right
of the in-house pictures, so I'm going to just quickly make an adjustment. Sorry,
yeah,
crowd.
sure, no worries.
I think it's for the benefit of Lynn and others. So
That's all right, no problem.
My big head getting in the way.
I thought it was just me who was seeing you twice.
No, I think it's the way I shared them. I apologize. Let me just try and do this better. Right. Okay. Is that where you're up to?
Yes, yeah, I think so.
Oh. Two secs. Need to move something around. Is that better now? I hope that's a bit better. I'll take myself out of view.
Yeah, I think so. I don't think you're also within the slides. But
I'm seeing a thumb up, so
there we go.
Apologies for that. Hopefully I've fixed it.
No worries.
Yeah.
Yeah, so and as part of reviewing and revising the Charter, Scottish ministers are required to review it from time to time. In practice, that seems to be every 5 years or so. And as part of the renewal, they're required to consult with a specified list of people, which includes the Scottish Housing Regulator, tenants, homeless people, social landlords, and also the Commission for Equality and Human Rights. So when reviewing and revising the Charter, the ministers have to consult with all of these people and get their views on it. So what does the Charter actually say? Let's see if I can move the slide along. There we go. So there are 16 standards and outcomes that social landlords are required to achieve. And just bearing in mind again that when I say social landlords, I'm referring to both housing associations and local authority housing. It applies to both. So we're not going to be covering all of these today. The elements that we're going to be focusing on for today's session are specifically related to tenant accountability measures and aspects relating to existing social housing tenants. So just to give an example of what we're not touching on, just for your reference, there are other parts of the charter that relate to housing options, so allowing people to make informed decisions about the range of options available to them. Access to social housing, so that talks about housing allocation lists and that kind of thing. And tenancy sustainment, so providing tenants with support to remain in their homes, homeless people and gypsy and traveller communities. So we're not going to touch on those elements of the charter today, but obviously that's a much broader topic. So the elements that we're going to be looking at, they fall into 4 categories. So firstly, the customer-landlord relationship. So equalities and specific elements that we're going to be touching on later in the context of comparison is supporting the right to adequate housing. And also every tenant has their individual needs and rights recognised, treated fairly and with respect. Communication, so social landlords are required to manage their business so that tenants find it easy to communicate with their landlord and get the information they need, and also about how and why the landlord makes its decisions. Linked to that, and is participation, and participation is an aspect that flows through the whole of the charter as well. So there's a requirement that landlords offer a range of opportunities that make it easy for tenants to participate in and influence their landlord's decisions. So that's something that landlords are legally required to actively develop in Scotland. They're actively required to have a tenant participation strategy, which will enable continuous improvements in landlord performance in supporting and enabling tenants to participate. And also the regulator requires demonstrable evidence that a social landlord has complied with this. That's obviously something that's quite a high bar to bear in mind when we come to compare the Wales and Scottish positions.
Can I jump in there on something?
Yeah, sure.
There was one thing in that the previous slide, which talked about they support the right to adequate housing. Now, this is a big subject in Wales at the moment. Tai Pawb, CIH campaigning on this subject. So it is already written in there in Scotland. How that works in practice is a different thing. But it's interesting to note that that is part of that charter that a lot of people in the housing organisations in Wales feel quite strongly should be a right. It's a difficult one as to what that means in practice, but it was interesting to see it in there in the charter. Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, no worries. Next, there's housing quality and maintenance. So again, looking at tenants' homes when they're allocated being clean and tidy in a good state of repair and meeting things like the Scottish housing quality standards and other building quality standards. Neighbourhood and community, so repairs, maintenance and improvement with a requirement that tenants' homes are well maintained, and estate management, antisocial behaviour, neighbour nuisance and tenancy disputes. So trying to ensure that tenants live in a well-maintained neighbourhood where they feel safe. Next, and this is another element that we're going to be looking at more in comparison with the Welsh position, is getting good value from rents and service charges. So value for money and rents and service charges, I've grouped the two together because they both flow into each other. But value for money, there's a requirement that tenants receive services that provide continually improving value for the rent and other charges they pay. And with rents and service charges, landlords are required to set rents and service charges in consultation with their tenants. And there's within that requirement, it's a requirement for the balance to be struck between the levels of services provided and how far tenants can afford them, and ensuring that tenants get clear information on this. This was an element that I was particularly interested in as to how this works in practice and what consult means in practice. It seems from a lot of the examples that I've seen, tenants are often asked to vote on whether they're happy to accept a rent increase. and information is provided as to why the increase is proposed, what the rent money is spent on, and what the services that the social landlord will be able to provide as a result. So sometimes I think from the examples that I've seen, the approach to this varies, but how it's best achieved might depend on the circumstances of that individual housing association. But in some examples, tenants are given maybe three options,
Yeah.
with a higher rent option, which allows more growth in services, a medium option, which allows services to be maintained at their current level, and a lower option where perhaps some of the services might be reduced. And then tenants are encouraged to vote on that. And there's a lot of transparency there around the results of the vote and the consultation outcome. I've also seen the rent amount and service charge amount being broken down in terms of how every pound of rent is spent. So that obviously provides a lot of transparency as well. And also, I've seen examples of how the rent increase compares to other social landlords and what they're doing. And that's information that's been published in the kind of booklets that are sent out to tenants. So that's obviously very transparent in terms of what other social landlords are doing as well.
Anybody in the meeting can comment if you've seen any votes before in Wales. It's not something I've seen Merthyr Valley do it. I think pre-lockdown they did one. But apart from Merthyr Valley, I've not seen many people where tenants have ever had a vote on the rent or setting. But yeah. Sorry.
No worries. Yeah, so looking at how the landlord's compliance with the charter is actually regulated. So worth bearing in mind that it's a requirement for social landlords to comply with the terms of the charter. It's not just guidance or best practice. It's the role of the Scottish housing regulator to monitor and assess how social landlords are performing. And again, just bearing in mind that that's both housing associations and local authorities. And there are consequences for non-compliance. So the housing regulator can take action where required. Each landlord is required to submit an annual return on the charter to the regulator every year and show how it's involved tenants. And landlords are also required to report its charter performance to tenants. On the next slide, I think I've got an example of what the regulator looks like. Let me just double check before so I've just got an example on the next page so you can see what it looks like. But the regulator publishes on its website a report for each landlord with key information from this ARC, annual return on the charter, performance data measured by charter standards and outcomes, and a comparison tool so tenants can look at how their landlord compares against other landlords. And as far as I can see, all of the information that landlords are required to submit is all published on the website. And I'll go on to the next slide to show you what that looks like. But also just to bear in mind that tenants are also encouraged to report serious concerns on the regulator's website. And I'll touch on that later as to what that looks like and how easy that is. But just to show you what this looks like, this is the Scottish Housing Regulator website. So you can see everything is just right up front. Landlord directory shows a comparison, and it's got all of the landlords in alphabetical order, and you can compare one landlord against another, or you can look at data of the wider the performance of the whole of the landlords. And the engagement plans is the information that the regulator publishes. So the regulator publishes an engagement plan about every social landlord in Scotland, providing information about whether they think they're compliant or non-compliant in the case of housing associations, and also whether they consider that they need to take any further action. Just to explain, the annual assurance statement, that's the information that the landlord is required to submit every year, is separate to the ARC, but it's part of the information that they also need to submit that's not related to the charter. Just to explain what that means.
If I just jump in here, the ARCs are the ones that are fascinating because it's what your landlord is saying they're doing, and it's a public document, and therefore, I know there's people on this call, that's an interesting read to see what they're saying versus what you think in practice. But the engagement plans are really nice as well. What the regulators working on with the landlord, what concerns they have, what areas they want to see improvements on. The annual assurance statements is a bit of a boring document in terms of that's just a formality not formality, but just very important, but that's not very interesting. But some really
Mm.
powerful stuff on this website, really powerful.
Yeah, and it's very clear in terms of the engagement plans, say things like, we have requested the landlord to do this, and they need to do X, Y, Z. So it's very clear on what they're requiring the landlord to do. So just moving to the next one. So how does it compare to Wales? So Wales doesn't have a social housing charter. The Welsh, just to flag, Welsh housing associations and local authorities aren't regulated by the same regulator. As David mentioned before, housing associations are regulated by the Welsh Government Housing Regulation Team and then governed by their regulatory framework, which I'll touch on in a minute. And local authorities are regulated by Audit Wales as part of their wider responsibilities for local government in Wales. And just in terms of comparison, there's no equivalent to the regulatory framework for housing associations, but there are perhaps other layers of scrutiny for councils that we'll touch on. I'm just going to go through some. So there are some elements that are covered in Wales across different regulations and legislation. If I just show you this table that I've got on the next page, I'm not going to go through all of this in detail, but just to show how there are nearest equivalents in Welsh housing that I've tried to kind of match together. And I'll just pick up a few points that I want to flag as part of this. So equalities, as David mentioned before, the requirement to support the right to adequate housing. And equalities generally, obviously, we've got the Equalities Act, and we've also got the Welsh regulatory standards applying to the housing associations. But the right to adequate housing is something that's quite kind of topical in Wales at the moment, because that's something that a lot of people are trying to incorporate at the moment. So worth flagging that that's something that's looking to be part of Scots law. Again, participation is another one that I just wanted to flag the differences, because there's a requirement for tenants to be offered a range of opportunities to make it easy to participate in and influence their landlord's decisions. There are aspects in Wales, like I've included the Welsh Government annual tenant satisfaction surveys as an example there. And there's obviously the Wellbeing of Future Generations Wales Act, where there's some requirements for local authorities might be required to work more collaboratively with tenants. But I just wanted to flag the participation aspect because it's something that's particularly strong in the Scottish housing element, because it's a legal requirement for social landlords in Scotland to have a tenant participation strategy, which will enable continuous improvement in landlords' performance in supporting and enabling tenants to participate. And I think I touched on it before, that the regulator requires demonstrable evidence that this has been complied with. It's also, from my calls, the participation element seems to be something that tenants particularly like. So just worth flagging that that's something that seems to be particularly strong in the Scottish position. And then the other point that I wanted to flag is in respect of the value for money and rents and service charge. So there is the Welsh Government rent and service charge standard, but I think that which requires landlords to demonstrate they've engaged with tenants. But I think that the Scottish Charter goes a bit further in terms of agreeing the rents with tenants. We've touched upon the vote, the element of the vote, and there's an additional requirement that information is provided as to why increases are proposed as well. So I think that that's something that just goes that one step further than in Wales, perhaps. Also, I noticed that this might be a little plug for the Tenants Pulse on Thursday, but I think that the latest Tenant Pulse report for TPAS Cymru is talking about a feeling of a lack of transparency around landlord conversations on rent and service charge. So I think that seems quite topical as well, to kind of mention that, and a little plug for the session on Thursday. So as you can see, I've obviously gone through this quite quickly, But as you can see, there are elements of Welsh housing that kind of plug in to make a similar picture to the charter, but in more of a patchwork way rather than one place. And in certain areas, I think the charter goes maybe one step further. There also seem to be lots of perhaps informal and voluntary things that various landlords in Wales are doing that aren't just necessarily prescribed like as clearly as they are in the charter. So looking at the regulation side of things, so Welsh Housing Association regulation, as we've said, regulated by the Welsh Government's housing regulation team. And there's also the regulatory framework which sets out outcomes that housing associations must comply with. The purpose is stated to be to protect tenants and investment in housing associations and to ensure that each housing association is well governed, deliver high quality homes and services and financially viable. So obviously there is a mention of protecting tenants there, but perhaps it's a bit of a broader scope than the charter specifically. The regulatory framework, just to mention, the regulatory framework is built on a principle of co-regulation. So regulator and housing associations take responsibility together. And there seems to be more of an idea of oversight and monitoring with intervention only where necessary. So perhaps more built on the basis of collaboration rather than regulation, maybe. Again, housing associations must submit a self-evaluation at least once a year, and tenants are not actively encouraged to report serious concerns to the regulator. So that's just to contrast the position with the Scottish regulator, where there's a big push for tenants to report any concerns direct, and it's very clear on the website how that works. I'll just show you as a kind of compare and contrast example. And David, do you want to chat that through?
I just want to mention, sorry, I'm jumping in, but I just want to say how good this website was, in terms of, I mentioned already landlord performance, and then say on the top there for tenants, straight away, there's that find out all about your landlord data, how we regulate them. And I like this complaint about landlord. It's not just a form, it's a grown-up page that basically says, obviously if you've got a complaint, take it up with your landlord, If it's about damp mold, all the usual stuff, there's an ombudsman as well. But if your complaint is around the governance or the management or, issues with the more regulatory nature of your housing association, here's how to contact us as an easy form. And they encourage it and they publish it. And I think, Catherine, did you say that there's been judgments made based on that from tenants?
Yeah, so I think from the discussions that I had, it seemed that there have been two. If there's a complaint about a social landlord, it's called a significant performance failure, I think. And there's been two of those upheld, and both of them have been on the basis of tenant participation, tenant complaints.
So that shows the power that, say, two different complaints have effectively, impacted the governance and management of those housing associations. So I really like, as I say, the Scottish site. I can't emphasize that enough. You're probably getting that theme already. In contrast, the Wales one's really hard because it doesn't have its own website, unlike Scotland. It sits within the mass, and I think I've said this many times with Welsh government people, and I think they know it, but it's working within Welsh government. It's just this huge site, and you have to try and navigate. And I tried searching yesterday for housing association regulation, and effectively what comes up is this page of links. There's 63 of them. I counted them last night. 63 on a page. And there's no real structure to it. I just don't get it. And I couldn't find that sort of how to report a complaint on there, or government, like the equivalent of Scotland. It's hard work. And I think that strikingly compared to what Scotland have got, it's not just that charter, but it's the data and transparency that goes with it. This isn't great. Even England, I mean, let's be honest, England used to be the poor performer in housing associations, but they've got a site of search, it's got features, it's got news on there, and it's got these what we call hotkeys where you can jump down to, information about your landlord, report statistics, And there's that one in the middle. I don't know if you can see it. Does the laser pointer work? Yeah. Make a referral or complaint, the same type of thing, if you've got an issue. Um, so even England is, I hate to say it, but even England's their site is looking better than Wales. And I think that's a sad state of affairs. And certainly as TPS Cymru, want to press Welsh Government on this. It's not necessarily, it's not the housing department, it's how it all works within that machine of Welsh Government and websites and data and things like that. It needs to be pushed at a higher level to try and get some space for you as tenants to be able to see this information. Sorry, end of my rant.
No worries. Yeah, I discussed this with David Lloyd at TPAS as well, and we wondered whether there is an ability on the Welsh website to raise a whistleblowing concern, but we were not clear on whether that is relevant to tenants or not, because you associate that more with employees maybe. And I think it said it can be raised by a member of staff, member of the board, or anyone else. So I'm not sure whether that applies to tenants, but either way, it's not specifically signposted for use by tenants.
It's somewhere
When
in
I
that
looked into
page,
it, and yeah. So looking at what about local authorities? So Audit Wales audits, inspects and regulates local authorities and their services. And the audit of local authority housing will fall within the wider local government performance audit and financial audit teams at Audit Wales. So the work, the focus will be risk driven and just kind of one part of the wider audit work that happens at the council. So housing may or may not be part of that programme depending on risks. And just to flag, there isn't a kind of equivalent set of regulatory standards which Audit Wales will measure local authority housing against, like against the housing associations, and they aren't required to submit an annual self-evaluation. So it's quite a different to the housing association scenario. Looking at the Audit Wales website, there are various reports that which show the kind of thing that they've looked at before. And it looks like they did a big project in 2017 to 18, where they looked at the service user perspective at every council in Wales. Quite a lot of that seemed to be focused on Welsh housing quality standards and tenant views. So there was quite a bit of tenant engagement with that. And I think looking at one example, Audit Wales engaged with a sample of service users speaking to 300 tenants on the phone. So it seems that they did engage with tenants quite a lot there, but it's not something that is necessarily every year or regularly, more risk-based. And one anonymous person said that they hadn't seen Audit Wales since 2018. So it seems since that big project, necessarily Audit Wales haven't focused on housing. There are obviously other regulations and layers of scrutiny to local authorities. So local authorities might argue that there's other things. It's not just about the Audit Wales regulation, but then it's a question to discuss perhaps of whether the self-regulation works and is it any stronger than independent housing authority boards. And again, it doesn't appear that tenants are able or encouraged to make complaints directly to Audit Wales.
Something on that as well, yeah.
Yeah, sure.
I get the elected councillor thing that there is a scrutiny panel, but they're not trained, skilled regulators. The people at Welsh Government's regulatory department are good. They've got good people there who have spent years and trained and know how to regulate. I'm not knocking our elected officials of Wales, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're the best people to be the checks and balances within their own organisation as well. They're not necessarily there to, make public issues or to censor their own, organisation. So I do struggle with a bit of that in terms of the independence of local authorities in that respect. I know that might offend a couple of people who are on the call here today, but there is a point to a regulator, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and there are obviously a variety of voluntary arrangements and things like that in place. Like local authorities do a lot of good things, but then it's not maybe necessarily something that they're forced to do in the way that the charter is. But again, welcome your views on this at the end. Yeah, and yeah, it doesn't appear that tenants are required or are able to make any complaints. So I just wanted to touch on, hang on. Oh, okay. So I just wanted to mention as well that there's a focus on Audit Wales's website about the elements that they're going to focus on in the next few years. And there are various housing elements as part of that. So building safety, net zero follow-up, and applying the Sustainable Development Principle under the Wellbeing of Future Generations Wales Act. So I think that if you look at the Audit Wales website, they do seem to publish the things that they tend to be focusing on, and that's what they've got planned. So looking at just opinions of the Scottish Charter, so what people said about it, I was keen to know whether people, particularly tenants, actually value it. What do they think about it? Overwhelmingly, tenants at the TPAS Scotland conference said that it's a good thing for Scotland. From the people who I've spoken to, it seems like it is something that's valued by tenants. A couple of people mentioned that there are some elements relating to charter indicators, which is to do with the outcomes that could be tweaked, but overall a good thing. One quote that I was really struck by that I've put on the next slide is from Colin. So he's the chair of Tenants Together, which was previously the Regional Tenants Network. And he said that on his first day as a social housing tenant, he was handed a copy of the charter and made aware of it. So one of the things I was keen to question was thinking, in theory, this all sounds great, but do tenants actually know about it? And it seems like they are made aware of it and tenants do know about it. The general consensus seemed to be that if tenants don't engage with their landlord at all, they might not know about it, or they might not be bothered by it. But on the whole, if tenants are engaged, they will definitely know about the charter and they are aware of their rights under it and seem to use it, or seem to refer to it. And then Evelyn at TPAS Scotland, who I spoke to, said that the charter is embraced by tenants because it sets a level playing field with landlords across the sector. And I wanted to look at what people said in responses to the consultation. So this was an independent consultation, independent analysis of responses to the consultation that Scottish Government did when they were looking to renew the charter in 2021. So just generally, the majority of, I don't think the charter was changed much in 2021 because it seemed like the majority of people were happy with what it said so far. And it seems that a lot of people find it to be enforceable enough that the regulator has the power to enforce if things go wrong, but also flexible enough that most local authorities can enforce their obligations under the charter, regardless of what their housing stock looks like, because obviously there's a big variety of stuff. So almost all respondents to this consultation welcomed the principle of a Scottish social housing charter and felt that it was a positive step forward for social housing in Scotland. And specifically the ARC that we talked about before, that annual return on the charter, it was perceived as having provided a consistent framework for all social landlords to work towards, as well as benchmarking their performance. And most respondents felt that the quality of the landlord services has improved because of the charter. So key improvements include tenant satisfaction levels, responsiveness to tenants' needs, better communication from staff, and increased landlord accountability and transparency. I also just wanted to pull out this quote from a voluntary group that as part of the response, where they said that the charter has played a fundamental role in embedding tenant participation in service delivery and delivering in Scotland's social housing sector.
Sorry.
Sorry.
No, my apologies. I didn't know the laser pointer was on.
Oh, no worries. I thought you were helping
No,
me
I was trying to
along.
read the chat in the background. My
No
apologies.
worries.
I'm
This
really, I'm not
is good.
helping
I've got
today, am I?
a glamorous assistant helping.
Sorry, no,
No
I can't
worries.
switch it off for some reason. Yeah.
That's all right. Yeah, requiring transparency in data collection and publication allows tenants, residents, and other stakeholders to easily access information about landlord performance over time, and it's an invaluable tool. I just wanted to pull that quote out because it aligns with a kind of theme that we've been discussing today about the transparency in data collection and showing and all of the information that's available on the website. So tenants are easily able to access the information and find out what their landlord is required to do. And it's not just tenants who value it. So this was another point that I wanted to look into, because I was wondering if, this all sounds so great for tenants, a landlord's happy with it, or was it difficult to implement, or I was interested in the landlord's views. So it seems that the general consensus from my conversations is that social landlords like it too, and they're happy with the transparency. So um, it's increased landlord accountability and transparency. It seems like the ARC return on the charter is a bit of work to do it, but generally landlords like it, and they like the ability to benchmark their performance against similar sized landlords. Um, and one RSL in the response also pointed to the benefit of being able to learn good practice from other landlords. So it seems like landlords are really seeing the benefits as well. And again, I wanted to pull this quote out from a local authority housing officer who said that you'd struggle to find anyone who thinks the charter is not helpful or a good thing. And again, just this quote kind of sums it up. So I wanted to pull that out as well, where they said, my view, and I think the general view of the sector, is that the charter has helped a great deal in understanding performance, focusing on weaker areas, and equipping tenants with the information they need to understand their landlord's performance. It is a good thing. The social housing regulator does a good job of reporting on it, making the full data set available and engaging with the sector to review it and the indicators on a regular basis. So the indicators, again, I haven't really gone into that in detail, but that just refers to how the regulator makes sure that the outcomes have been met. And I think that's something that's reviewed on a regular basis and an ongoing basis. So I think that that's a quick kind of run through the provisions, and these are our thoughts. Dave, if you want to talk through talk through our thoughts.
We've talked about this a number of times now as you've been doing this work. I think the first thing is there's not massive differences between the charter and a range of different housing regulations in Wales. There's bits here, bits there, bits in homeless, WHQS, the regulation. So there are some fundamentals though, as we mentioned already, that right to adequate housing. I know that's open in consultation at the moment. The participation rights we thought were stronger in Scotland. I know no one wants to prescribe how you should do tenant engagement, how you should do tenant things, but you could see it was just a bit more beefy, a bit more things like scrutiny is almost a requirement, It just felt a bit stronger. And that tenant vote on rent set. Now there's a whole plus and minuses to that. There's a whole world of pain. If people are interested, I think I'd like to do a session in the future on that about tenant voting on rent, because they've been doing this for years and years. They've got decades of experience of how it works, how to engage people, how to explain to people, what the consequences are. If you vote for something too little, you don't be surprised if your services are all cut, But I think there is some fundamentals there. And whether we need them or not, that's, I think, for the community in Wales to decide. But what I do like is the charter brings a lot of good intention and policy that's scattered around in Wales into a single place that can be understood by tenants and landlords. Everyone can see it in one place. It's hard work reading some of the stuff that we have out there. Good quality stuff in Wales, but it's not exactly the easiest to digest, and it's scattered. I like the charter for that. And that result, and what goes with it is that transparency we've talked about already, the outputs, the quality of the data that Catherine's been showing, the website reporting on the websites. It all appears to be underpinning that charter. And I think also, Welsh local authority tenants, they don't have that security of the regulation framework. Do they need it? That's not for me to say, but I think local authority tenants should be consulted on whether they believe they would benefit from being under a regulatory framework. What that regulatory framework looks like, I think, is to be discussed, but it doesn't feel right. This is England, they've gone down. Local authorities, all the customer measures are now under the regulator. Scotland, all the local authorities are under the regulator. We feel like the odd one out now, and I don't know whether that's right or wrong. And it's not for me to call, but yeah, there's some interesting stuff here. I just want to mention, sorry, I can't get off this. You might have to move me on. I can't get off this
Oh, hang
laser.
on.
I'm stuck on laser pointer. So
Here you go.
Catherine, for us, has done quite a detailed report on this, 33 pages. As you'd imagine from a solicitor, it's detailed. It's a good read. We are looking to make a summary version available soon, depending on Catherine's resources, to try and get something easier to digest, bringing all this work together. Also, if anyone please don't ask unless you really are going to read it. But if you want to see the whole 33 page, we might just have to clip some of the names in some of the quotes and things like that, just to protect certain people. Some of them, like Leslie Baird and stuff, she'd stand by anything. But we had honest conversations with some local authorities, with the Scottish regulator, and we might need to protect certain bits and bobs in that. But if you're interested, let us know. But certainly the summary version, give us I don't know, a week or so. I'm putting Catherine on the spot now, but we will try and get a document out. And I think the other thing is, if you feel this be useful in your tenant group or within your organization, let us know. I'd love to have this conversation about this type of stuff, or you know of an area. But we'll come off the slides now. I'd like to, if I can, no, I can't. Get off the bloody slide. Right, let's discuss. I'd like to get your views now, using the chat, using the Q&A and things like that, about, what you think of this charter, Should we have one in Wales? Should it be formal, should it be this, or should it be informal or voluntary, Should it include local authorities? Or do you think that the current system's fine, At the end, I've got a quick poll I want to do. I might be able to get onto it. But I just want to have the discussions first before we do a poll on, do you agree with this, and next steps and things like that. So whilst I shut this down, I just want to say thank you to Catherine as well, who's done all the hard work on this, as you can tell.
No worries.
Some really good work here. So if we just have a look at has anyone used the Q&A yet? I did say I'd prioritize. My chat is not working. John, right. Okay. So, John, anything you want to put in there? Dave O'Connor's asked, who would fund the monitoring of the charter? As a local authority tenant, we concerned to be passed on to tenants. Good point. The moment, the Welsh regulation is done by Welsh government. It would just I think the technical name used to be called domain regulation. It's domain as to how far reaching it went. And if local authorities doing that, yes, you'd need more resources in that department. You'd like to think there'd be some savings somewhere else in Wales, but certainly that domain would be an issue, would be covered under the civil service costs, but yeah, I don't think it'd be a direct cost to the tenants. It's just part of, the services of government. At least that's what I'm aware of. I'm not, unless anyone wants to contradict me, please do. I don't know if there's any Welsh Gov people lurking in the background. They might just want to. Right, let me have a quick look at the comments. Then a copy of the slides. Yeah, all the slides, videos, we'll make all that available today. Interested in a copy? I don't know if that's the full report, but yeah, we can make that available. There'll certainly be a shorter one or a summary style document that we're going to work on that. David Connor, we could argue questioning, we spin it on, seems. Yeah, that vote, that's an interesting one, isn't it? I think what you're saying there is you can scrutinize landlords' decisions on rent setting, but reality is most people just put it to whatever the minister's cap is. It's meant to, the minister every year when she meets, or cabinet secretary, whatever you want to call them this week, when they've met with the housing association chief executive, she's always stressed it's a max, it's like the speed limit. You don't have to all drive at the speed limit. You don't all have to go to that max, but pretty much everyone does. And therefore that tenant voice in that has been really quite limited. It's I think there are some nice affordability models that are being developed in Wales at the moment, but there is no culture of vote. And I think Merthyr Valley Homes is the only one I've ever come across who have polled in the past, but I don't know if that's been done in recent years, you know.
Yeah, I was looking at the Scottish version. I was interested in how that would work if the vote was just a kind of tick box exercise saying, yeah, we've asked them, but we've decided to go for this.
Yeah.
But it does seem to be like that from the examples that I've seen, and I think these were kind of best practice examples as well.
Yeah.
But from the examples I've seen, it seems like it's very transparently of this is what you told us, these are the percentages of votes of that we've had for A, B, or C, and this is what we're going for. So it does seem to be quite transparent with that it isn't just a kind of tick box that it's already decided. It is based on what the tenants say from what I've seen for the Scottish one.
From my memory, when I've chatted to people, it's often done every 2 years. It's not an annual thing always. It's done almost like a 2-year rent settlement. So landlords do need a certain amount of, they can't just wait 3 weeks or so before the rent rises. They've got a
Yeah.
plan, they've got lots of issues with that. So I think, from my understanding, it was most people do a 2-year rent thing, which has its plus and minuses. John Jones said, last year you were told about significant rent rise. There was little opportunity to argue against. Yeah, I agree. In Wales, the minister sets the cap, and pretty much everyone just sets it to that. Now, there are, like I say, in defense of some of the landlords, there are some good models being developed in that, but the cap is still that, and most people will see rent rises around that. We're just arguing amongst the cap who gets more and who gets less, in that. Lynn, I like the idea of the charter. Wales to another talking shop. It doesn't include tenants and residents. What's going to force any issue with housing association transparency? I understand, a certain amount of cynicism on this. I felt proper energy for the charter at TPAS Scotland's conference from tenants and landlords. I think most of those metrics are already in place in Wales, but it's about bringing them, I think, into a one-stop shop, easy to, one document. I think, Catherine, you mentioned about people went straight to the ARCs, wasn't it? That's that annual return by the land. They can see straight away what the landlord's claiming and hold them to account. You've said that you did this, really? Or
Yeah, and
good
from the
practice.
from the examples that I've seen, it's sometimes it can say things like we require the landlord to do this, and they've got until this date to do it, and that kind of thing. So it's very clear as to what they need to do when as well in the on the website.
Yeah, and I think that doesn't happen in Wales. I remember Jason, Chief Executive Newydd, sitting down with tenant group and talking through what they plan to send off to the regulator. And they were quite transparent, going, this is what plans say. Do you agree, disagree? And the scrutiny panel, or may not be the scrutiny panel, the senior tenant panel at Newydd went through it and agreed, disagreed, and there was tweaks made and things like that. But there was a transparency in there. So I'm not saying that we're behind or anything, but I think the charter brings all boats up, rather than just these pockets of good practice. Don't know. Let me, sorry, Q&A, but I'll go back to switch to that one. A lot of the material in Mel Rayner, a lot of material in the charter is covered by the regulatory framework. I think feasibility of enforcement is much stronger in the charter. I agree. Yeah. Do you look at the ability of the regulator to enforce more effectively? Yeah, I mean, there is a bit of that. The regulator department, some good people there. I know a lot of them. But they have got limited resources. So, there's only so much they can do. But I do think the charter gives a bit more enforcement power. It brings more responsibility on the landlord. If a landlord has to comply to a better standard and a clearer standard, then that makes the regulation a bit easier, to check on them, because you're bringing up the standard and therefore the level of that regulation, I think, should be, you could argue, easier. But no, there's something there about resources has to come with responsibility, you know. Um, right, John Jones, yeah. You say the Scotch Town's happy with their regulatory authority. Um, there is a regulator in England. Yeah, no, the England's had to take a real look at itself over the last few years, um, for obvious reasons, not just the terrible, unnecessary tragedy of Grenfell, but also damp and mold and things like that. So things like the ombudsman in England, I think, has got a lot better over the last couple of years. They've really had to get their act together, and have got quite a bit of power now, that the English ombudsman. And I think the same with the regulatory stuff. I like the new let's call it traffic lights. Is probably the best way that England are doing it. That is one of my polls later, which was, should we do something on how the regulatory judgments are done? Because I was at some presentations in England recently on by the English regulator, and I was like, I quite like this, how they're separating out financial regulation, governance, and tenant and customer voice. And I think the England regulator's got something interesting to say. So that might be something, if there's interest, where we could run. But I don't pretend it's nowhere near happy there. There's no, there's no magic regulator anywhere. Yeah. Good. What else have we got? Ian. Yeah. RSLs are required to publish their self-evaluation, which includes their improvement plan to available tenants. Yes, that's what I'm saying. There's many things we already have in Wales. It's just maybe not always aware. Awareness might be an issue. As Ian Walters has said, house associations have to publish their self-evaluation, includes the improvement plan, and it should be available. How many of you could find it on their website, or where would you find it? Well, that might be a task for somebody to do. Yeah, right. Okay. It won't be Catherine. I think she'll be going off into do other projects somewhere else soon. But maybe we could find someone to do that. How easy it is. Yeah, as David Connor says, it's where they hide it away. That's the problem. Yeah, much more transparent in Scotland. So you could argue the same information, but it's ease, isn't it? The ease of it. Right. You can carry on comments and chat and things like that, but I haven't used, like, bear with me on this. I've not used polls for a while, and it was only within the TPAS board. So I don't know how I'm going to go with this, but I'd like to get your views on a couple of things here. Let me just, okay, I'm going to launch one. Let's see if it works. Does it come up? Can you click on it? So do you think Wales should have a social housing charter? Yes, no. It could be different to Scotland. It doesn't have to be the same, but do you think? Okay. Okay. I'm not going to, this is only indicative. This doesn't make it suddenly. And some of you are commenting on the side. I know some of you on iPads and phones, these things don't always work. But yeah, I don't know if you can see the results, but I'm just going to end it there because it's only meant to be a snapshot. And it's a 9-1 in favour. We've certainly got somebody. Let's have a look. Don't know if you can see that. Yeah. 9-1 in favour of that. I'm going to try another poll then. If I can get out of this. Sorry, as I said, I haven't done this for a while. It just keeps going back to the same one. Right, I'm going to try a second one. Do you think local authority housing should come under the same regulation as housing associations? I didn't give a don't know option on that. I think there's okay. Seems to be support for that. In fact, at the moment it's 10 out of 10. Yes and no. So it's not quite clear what you're seeing, but yeah, there is strong support within the limited amount of people who voted for local authorities should come under the same regulation, whatever that is. Try and close it. The back. Next one, I'm going to try and launch is a two-parter. I'm just wanted to ask, do you support the idea of a campaign for a Welsh housing charter? That might be just TBAS, it might be with other people. I think there's some interesting bits there that Tai Pawb would be interested in, but we have limited resources, but I feel like this is something maybe we should be campaigning on. Oh, screen's gone off. Okay, again, strong support for the idea of a Welsh housing charter there. I don't know whether you can see the results. Again, I haven't used this for a while. I didn't test it before to see what you can see, but it's a mixture there, mainly the tenants. I think, to be fair, some of the landlords and interested parties have probably backed off and not voted on this because this does feel like a tenant decision, but there's certainly some strong support within the limited group for that. And then the last one, I promise you, can't remember this one though. So I mentioned before about the regulatory judgments. England have got new measures, new traffic lights. Scotland have got something different. Oh, shit, sorry, I went back. I closed that. I accidentally closed that. Can I do it again? Damn it. Relaunch poll. Sorry, I'm gonna have to relaunch that. That was my fault. Do you have any view? Would you like to see a session on how the regulatory judgments are in other nations? I'm sure we could line up some people for that. And I believe this might be a plug for TPAS conference, but I believe Jenny, the chief exec of TPAS England, will be talking about English regulation at conference and about how it works, what's happening over there, what's changed. So some of the comments from John Jones there. So yeah, if you are coming to conference, Jenny Osborne, chief exec of TPAS England, will be talking about that.
Yes, David, she will be. She's
Yeah.
booked. Yeah.
Okay, I'll end that poll. So again, seems to be strong support for maybe doing something else on that. Let's say the start will be Jenny doing something at conference. Stop sharing. Okay, I'm open. Are we back in the room? I don't know why Helen's pinned all of a sudden. Keith has been putting yes in the chat. Thank you, Keith. I know not all of you can use the poll depending on your device, but thank you for your support on that. I think I need to just quickly look at in Q&A. I think we've covered everything there. Right. Maybe that's the end of the session. I'd like to say thank you for all of you who've come to this, and to Catherine, who's done some really hard work on this. I think it's really given us valuable insight as to what other people are doing here. And yeah, I'd like to say thank you, Catherine. Thank you to all of you. We'll make the recording available, the slides, documents, anything you want on this. If there's any follow-up sessions anyone wants to do in their group, I can jump on a call or come to your tenant group or something. Yeah. Thanks, Dave, for your comments there. Excellent session. Thanks for all the work. Yeah. I think it's been informative. I wish we'd had more people here. I think the timing was terrible for the Tuesday. We thought was the end of the school holidays, but it's not. But yeah, thanks, Rob, as well, and Mel for the comments. Thanks, Catherine, and we'll speak to you all soon. Take care. Cheers. I'll end this session.
Thanks, everyone.